In July 1999, Big Finish Productions released their first ever Doctor Who audio drama, being The Sirens of Time. Flash forward 20 years and Big Finish Productions are celebrating their 20th anniversary with a special Doctor Who release, The Legacy of Time, featuring many familiar faces, multiple doctors and a very large Big Finish production team. Fasten your seatbelts as I'm going to be taking a look at this 20th anniversary release, and it's going to be one exciting and emotional ride. So here we are, the 20th anniversary of Big Finish. I think it would be fair to say that this box set has been one that has been highly anticipated by Doctor Who fans, both people who have been experienced Big Finish listeners, but also new listeners hoping to get into Doctor Who audio dramas for the first ever time. Now, The Legacy of Time is a 6-part story release, of course featuring different adventures with different doctors, with an overarching plot arc. It is a story of which that I was a little bit concerned about, because normally when it comes to multi-doctor stories on Big Finish, sometimes they can be a little bit over-ambitious. So I was really looking forward to seeing how this release was going to pan out, considering that it is meant to be aiming at both the experienced listener as well as the new listeners as well. And before we even get into the review itself, happy birthday, Big Finish. It is of course something that is certainly worth celebrating. A whole 20 years of Doctor Who on audio drama, delving into many different eras of the show's history, and pretty much doing adventures from every single known incarnation of the Doctor, and even into the other universes of Doctor Who as well. Big Finish are a brilliant company with some really lovely people on board. The writers and production teams behind every single release put in amazing efforts and passion into every single story, and quite frankly, 20 years are incredibly well deserved, and they have essentially over the many years of their production actually kept Doctor Who alive for many Doctor Who fans, and of course gave many of the classic Doctors opportunities that the TV show didn't manage to give them. So yeah, happy birthday, Big Finish. You are very much appreciated, and I look forward to reviewing many more of your releases in the future to come. So first off, and as always with my Doctor Who Big Finish audio drama reviews, in the description below there will be a link to the Big Finish website where you can find out further details about this release. It is currently available in 2 different formats, being both physical and download. The physical set itself is a really lovely collector's piece, very similar to that of the other collector's books that they've released over the years, however in a slightly different design, really nicely displaying all the discs on the inside of the box. This product is in fact priced at £44.99, and I do believe that it has sold in fact rather quickly. The last time that I got told, I think it was around 70% sold. So basically, if you are a fan of collecting physical releases, this product is only limited to 4,000 copies, and once it is gone, it is gone. So considering that it is the 20th anniversary special, I recommend buying it as soon as you can. Of course, this episode is also available on download as well. As per usual, you can get that on the Big Finish website for the price of £39.99. And of course, the Big Finish website does also contain additional story synopsis details, casting information and production credits on this release, and you can also listen to the trailer as well, which is also available on the Big Finish and official Doctor Who YouTube channels, which I did in fact feature on recently, very excitingly, in the Doctor Who Big Finish 20th anniversary live stream. So I don't know if you can go back and watch that, but if you did, you may be able to spot me in there. So it's very exciting indeed, and thank you Big Finish for that opportunity. Taking a look at only some of the people that actually worked on this release, the cover artist is Tom Webster, the director is Ken Bentley, the executive producers are Nicholas Briggs and Jason Haig-Ellery, the music has been created by Howard Carter, the producer is David Richardson, the script editors are Matt Fitton and Guy Adams, the sound design has been created by Howard Carter, and the writers for this 6-part epic are James Goss, Guy Adams, Jonathan Morris, Matt Fitton and John Dorney. Now, I'm not even going to bother going into the cast list for this release because, quite frankly, it is absolutely massive and does of course go into both new series and classic series Doctor Who, making it a really lovely celebration piece. And of course, throughout talking about the actual stories, I will mention the characters in there as well. Which, speaking about talking about The Legacy of Time, this review is going to be a little bit different because I'm not going to sit here and basically reel off the entire narrative to you. If anything, I'm only going to feed you the bare bones of the actual story itself, itself, and not reveal any of the exciting twists, not reveal any of the character developments that are featured throughout these stories, and basically just give you an overall taste of what the box set is about, because there is no point at all of me going into the scripts and characters in detail and basically telling you about everything that happens within the box set itself, because at the end of the day it's worth experiencing firsthand. So if you like what I say throughout this review, then simply go and buy the release and actually experience it for yourself, as opposed to maybe searching around to try and find spoilers, because it's something of which that is worth experiencing without knowing the different Easter eggs and different references in there, much like how I did when listening to this release for the first ever time. So taking a look at the opening episode of The Legacy of Time, we have Lies in Ruins as written by James Goss. Now this episode is very exciting because we do of course get to see two of Big Finish's main powerful leading lady characters, being Bernice Summerfield as portrayed by Lisa Bowerman, and of course Alex Kingston as Professor River Song, meet up for the first ever time. And of course the Doctor for this story is Paul McGann as the 8th Doctor. Now the version of the 8th Doctor that we get to see throughout this episode is in fact the Time War variation of the 8th Doctor from later on in his life. This is of course a very exciting episode, and one of which that fans have wanted to see for quite a while, because we have these two very powerful female characters from the Doctor Who universe meeting for the first ever time. And I do believe from when River Song was first introduced to Doctor Who, people were in fact thinking, especially Big Finish fans, that River Song is very similar to that of Bernice Summerfield, and I do see it. They are archaeologists, they've travelled with multiple incarnations of the Doctor, and they are both very mysterious and independent. James Goss has written this episode in a very effective way. At first I was very concerned that this episode was going to start off with a lot of bickering and basically trying to figure out who is more powerful and who is better and who has met more incarnations of the Doctor than the other. However, it turns out of the runtime of this episode, both of the actual characters tend to bond over the Doctor himself because of their relationships that they've had with him, and they realise that he is in a rather weak mental state, and they basically try and encourage him round to be the Doctor that they know, and from doing that they end up with a more tighter relationship between them. Of course, for me, Lisa Bowerman as Bernice Summerfield is always going to have the upper hand, because naturally I love the character more than River Song. I do think that Big Finish has definitely developed River Song a lot further from what we got to see within the TV show itself, and I think that Lisa Bowerman once again puts in an excellent portrayal, which is something of which that can be expected, considering that she has been Bernice Summerfield for longer than Doctor Who actually being on Big Finish. Of course, Bernice Summerfield was one of Big Finish's first ever publications, and then she was brought into the Doctor Who universe in a rather excellent way. And I love Bernice. I think that every single release that I've listened to her within, especially the New Adventures, is really fun and upbeat, but also there's quite a lot of adult material within that as well. Talking about Alex Kingston as River Song, once again Big Finish have managed to pad out her character and generally make me like her a little bit more, and that is certainly the case within the 8th Doctor adventures that she has been in, such as Doom Coalition. I feel like her character throughout that series has been developed, and she does have more character to her as opposed to just being a plot point. Big Finish have managed to develop her and actually make her feel like more of a character when the Doctor isn't around. As for the actual narrative itself, this story does have an interesting concept and does almost have a doomsday apocalypse feel about it. Without going into the detail of the actual episode itself, we basically see a planet that is pretty derelict and destroyed. We have these space equivalents of a rag and bone man coming to claim the planet. However, the 8th Doctor, of course, naturally doesn't want them to claim the planet for multiple reasons. Also see a more depressed side of the 8th Doctor. Considering when listening to this story, I have came directly from the further adventures of Lucy Miller, which is naturally a more upbeat and happy version of the 8th Doctor. Seeing this war-torn version of McGann in this episode is really rather heartbreaking, and certainly delivers more impact than I would have noticed before, and McGann's performance is in fact the best of this episode. He is absolutely brilliant, and some of his best work as the 8th Doctor during the Time War that I've seen in fact ever. This episode has a peak to it, and James Goss has written it in a way that is incredibly effective, and yet I praise Paul McGann for that delivery as well, because he was incredible. I really found respect for McGann in this episode because his way of acting was just powerful and very sad at the same time. So now moving swiftly on to the second episode of The Legacy of Time, we have the Splitfinitive as written by John Dorney. Now this episode does in fact feature Sylvester McCoy as the 7th Doctor, along with Sophie Aldred as Ace, and rather excitingly, we see the 7th Doctor team up with Countermeasures, which is another classic series Doctor Who spin-off, and an area of Big Finish that I'm yet to experience. So this episode is a really lovely jumping on point for me to be introduced further to their characters. Of course, they were originally introduced in the 7th Doctor story Remembrance of the Daleks, and basically from what I understand they were a sort of before unit kind of group. I must admit, I think that all of them are a rather nice team and kind of an amateur version as a save unit, kind of without the guns and the weapons. They are a little bit more strategic and planning, and kind of a little bit more intelligent than Unit's all guns blazing approach. Now this episode sees the 7th Doctor in the 1970s and Ace in the 1960s, as both of them are split off on two separate adventures, both with the Countermeasures team. The 60s variation of the Countermeasures team along with the 70s version basically have two episodes going on at the same time, and what is really lovely to see is the different developments between the 60s version of Countermeasures and the 70s version. The 70s one being a lot more developed and a lot more intelligent, certainly more used to the adventures that they have within the Doctor Who universe, and the 60s version is a little bit more practicing, a little bit more amateur, and just getting into the swing of things. And this story sees an alien called Punchin, and basically he's this mysterious force I'm not really going to say too much about, and basically he is in both time periods. 10th Doctor and Ace both track down Punchin and kind of have both of these adventures, as I say, that kind of affect each other at the same time, because whilst this episode is going on, the Countermeasures team are getting memories from the 60s, and likewise the 70s versions are then remembering and then are able to contribute those memories that are happening at the same time 10 years earlier within the 70s present day of the story itself. It's quite a timey-wimey one, I must admit. I was quite shocked to see how much this episode did jump over the place, considering that this is meant to be targeted at new listeners. But that said, at the same time, I think that if you take the episode quite slowly, it's quite enjoyable. But I think that John Dorney himself also contributed a really lovely personal element to this story, which I'm not going to say too much about, but it does happen in the later half of this episode. And yeah, it's kind of a James Bond story. You have the equivalent of tracking down, you have gang crime, and you even have a very cool plane sequence in there as well, which is very nice. Yeah, very James Bondy, especially considering that it's set within the 60s and 70s, so kind of a traditional James Bond in a way, especially considering that it's referenced in the early half. But John Dorney has done a very good job to in fact write a rather nice confined 1-hour episode that does also get the ball rolling with the actual plot arc of The Legacy of Time itself. And now we travel into the world of Unit for episode 3 of The Legacy of Time, which is The Sacrifice of Jo Grant, as written by Guy Adams. Now this episode is in fact worth your purchase alone, in my opinion. It is by far my favourite episode of this box set. It is pretty much when I said at the start of this review that Legacy of Time is an emotional roller coaster, I may as well refine that a bit more and basically say that episode 3 is a roller coaster of emotion in its own right, because this story is incredibly powerful and certainly defines the idea of a celebration. And Guy Adams, I praise him very, very much because I've experienced quite a lot of Guy Adams over the years of listening to Big Finish, but this episode for me has really proved to me his strengths as a writer, certainly when writing characters. This story does of course see Gemma Redgrave reprising her role as Kate Stewart, along with Ingrid Oliver as Osgood. We don't have any of the other Unit team in this story from present day. However, we do see the return of the older version of Jo Grant as portrayed by the lovely and adorable Katie Manning, and she is excellent throughout this story. Once again, she has returned as the older version before in the Unit story. The Unit box set even assembled, which was lovely, seeing the Silurians and the Sea Devils in classic series team up with new series, and basically we have the further development of that relationship. What happened after? It turns out that Ingrid Oliver as Osgood in fact had a sort of further relationship with Jo Grant after the events of that box set. They kind of meet up and have little days out, which is quite cute, and of course that is soon interrupted by Kate Stewart. I think I mentioned in the previous unit, the new series box set review, box set had an excellent amount of focus on Kate Stewart as a character, especially within the final episode of that box set, delving into her more personally. Does that even further. Her portrayal as Kate Stewart is probably the best that I've ever seen. I really, really love it, and I got a lot of respect for her character throughout this story. It nearly made me cry, this episode, because of what it managed to do. So yeah, I recommend this one a lot. Due to the weaknesses in time that have already been established within the previous stories and would also be established in the later stories as well, this episode basically sees some portals appear, or breaks in time, where things can come through from other times, and basically we see once again that version of classic series unit and new series unit almost having two different stories going alongside each other, and you can compare between the two, which is a really lovely touch. You have Joe Grant almost linking the two together in a really lovely way. Of course, in the 70s version of Unit, you do also have Tim Treloar as playing the Third Doctor, which this is in fact my first ever experience of Tim Treloar as the Third Doctor. Of course, he's done a few Third Doctor volumes in the past, which I've never listened to, simply because I can't listen to everything that Big Finish release, because I quite frankly do not have the time. But yeah, Tim Treloar's performance is one of which that is hit and miss, I would say. I think some moments are heartbreakingly right and feel amazing, because it feels like Jon Pertwee is very much back in the room as the Doctor. However, some other moments do catch me off a little bit, and I do think that that character is not Jon Pertwee as the Doctor. I think some lines here and there are just a little bit off, but I do think that Tim Treloar's portrayal is fairly accurate, to say the least, and once again his relationship is just incredibly warm and lovely in many, many ways. I think that this story basically does what Big Finish is known for, and that is the impossible, and this story basically reunites the TV show with audio drama in a way that is incredibly powerful, something of which you would never see happen within the TV show itself, simply because it is impossible. Actually being able to hear it through your ears in the audio drama format is simply amazing, and I love it very, very much, and by far is one of my favourite episodes of this box set. It is absolutely phenomenal. So yeah, I highly recommend buying this box set alone, simply for this story. If you are a fan of Unit, if you are a fan of Katie Manning as Joe Grant, who is excellent, or if you are a fan of the Third Doctor era, this episode is for you in many, many ways. It is a love letter to that era of the show. It's absolute perfection. Episode 4, Relative Time, as written by Matt Fitton. Now this episode does of course see the Fifth Doctor, as portrayed by Peter Davison, team up with Georgia Tennant, of course the Doctor's daughter. Now the lovely novelty of this story is of course, as we all know, the Doctor's daughter is portrayed by Georgia Tennant, and Georgia Tennant is in fact the daughter of Peter Davison, who plays the Fifth Doctor. So this episode is quite literally the Doctor and her daughter within the studio recording a Big Finish story, and that is certainly reflected throughout the characters themselves. I think it would be very worrying if it wasn't. There is a brilliant relationship between them within this actual story. There is quite literally a daughter and her father kind of going through life together. Originally the Fifth Doctor doesn't really trust Jenny, believes it is an alien, I think, taking on her form, and he just doesn't believe that he would in fact give away a part of his DNA and build to create another creature, of course, because at this point within Doctor Who history you wouldn't imagine the Doctor actually having a daughter, and I think that that is really nicely reflected in the script. Georgia Tennant does also do a really lovely job as Jenny. Of course, the unusual thing is that we've only seen one box set so far of Jenny as the Doctor's daughter. Presumably we'll get to see more in the future. I do believe that Georgia Tennant has in fact recently, only just this year, had another child with David Tennant, therefore it probably would have been a bit inconvenient to produce another audio drama series, so no doubt we will see another one at some point. But yeah, I do think that this episode is solely fan service. It can't be denied. It is fan service, seeing these two characters together. Of course there is that question of how can she meet the Fifth Doctor when of course they only meet within the 10th incarnation and all of that, and people think that Big Finish have done wrong and they don't understand blah 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 blah, and I think that people underestimate how intelligent Big Finish actually are, because the writers of these box sets are fully aware of Doctor Who continuity. That is something that is constantly referenced on the official Doctor Who YouTube channel within the comments section of, say, the 8th Doctor Adventures meeting River. How can this happen? Blah 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 blah. Once again, I don't think people realise that Big Finish writers are fans of the actual show themselves. They know what they can and can't do, and they know when they can rewrite things. This episode does also see John Heffernan as the Nine, which is of course a character that was introduced within the Doom Coalition series, and for that reason I'm really happy that they've brought this Time Lord within to the Legacy of Time, because I absolutely love the idea of the 9 or the 11 or whatever you want to call him, because of the idea of his split personalities. It's something that is incredibly effective. Of course, personally for me, I like Mark Bonar as the 11 a little bit more. However, I love John Heffernan's portrayal as well. And I think that he is a very lovely version of this Time Lord, because he has this side to him that is a collector or a hoarder, and he likes to go around the universe collecting and getting things, and basically you see that theme utilised throughout this story in a really lovely way. It contributes directly to the actual narrative itself, which is a really lovely touch. I really credit Matt Fitton for that. Of course, they couldn't really use Mark Bonar, simply down to his very dedicated plot arc within the actual Doom Coalition and Ravenous series, and his rather developed relationship with the 8th incarnation of the Doctor, but I'm glad that they brought him into this series, so fans who haven't experienced Doom Coalition and Ravenous have the opportunity to experience this Time Lord within another box set, because so far he's been completely dedicated to that series that is certainly very convoluted and developed within pre-story context and back knowledge that is required, making it a box set that isn't really that accessible for new listeners. So I am glad that he's been brought into this series in a rather lovely way, especially within another incarnation of the Doctor as well. Seeing them both interact together is something very different to that of the 9 with the 8th incarnation. Funnily enough, at the same time, I did get a very Doom Coalition Ravenous vibe from this episode, because you have a lot of technobabble going on. The Doctor and Georgia, or at least Jenny even, is on this ship, and basically the ship is pretty much reversing into the equivalent of this force of time. Basically, that is the plot of this story in simple form. I think that you need to experience this episode once again firsthand in order to get a full understanding of the story itself. It's nice, however, it's not my favourite episode of the box set. It's not particularly groundbreaking in any way. It's just a Doctor Who story, and by this point I was kind of a bit worried that I'd actually missed something within the actual plot arc itself, because I didn't really know where it was going. But it was still enjoyable, and by far that relationship between the 5th Doctor and Jenny kind of made this episode what it was. Episode 5 is The Avenue of Possibilities, as written by Jonathan Morris, and this episode is the 6th Doctor one of the box set. Yay, I'm naturally very excited. However, this episode for me was a little bit of a hard one, because for those of you that have listened to the behind the scenes, or for those of you that do not know, this episode was originally scripted to be a Jago and Lightfoot story. Of course it makes sense, because Jago and Lightfoot are pretty much companions of the 6th Doctor. They've become more a friend of the 6th Doctor than they did of the 4th Doctor, which is very unusual but brilliant at the same time. And originally this episode was going to star Christopher Benjamin as Henry Gordon Jago, along with Trevor Baxter as Professor George Lightfoot. However, sadly, as we all know, Trevor Baxter did of course pass away, therefore they were not able to record that story. And Jonathan Morris did in fact re-script this episode. It is a little bit different, and we have in fact a lovely episode that has been made out of a rather sad event, really. Now, it would have been great to see Jago and Lightfoot in some form, maybe in a similar way to Jago and Lightfoot Forever, maybe reprising Trevor Baxter through previous voice clips from other episodes, because it was done in a very effective way throughout Jago and Lightfoot Forever. Because I personally believe that Jago and Lightfoot, regardless, kind of should have been a part of this box set in a way, even if it was just a little cameo or flashback or something. They are a very pivotal part of Big Finish, and I think that they should have been in it as the same. But this episode itself, what we actually got to see is a really lovely story with the 6th Doctor and Charlie Pollard, and does once again have the idea of different time periods and parallel universes. Now, the story starts off in a rather nice way. We have 2009 and a police station, and basically this episode introduces Henry and John Fielding, who are the creators of the police force that we know today. and we have their characters, or one of them, actually meeting the police force of contemporary Earth, which is a really lovely touch due to these time corridor type things that have opened up, kind of fractures around London. We see them going back as well to 1751 for a more historical story with the Sixth Doctor and Charlie, and we have the whole idea of paradoxes and things going wrong with time streams kind of played with throughout this story, which, for those of you that know the background to Charlotte Pollard's backstory as a companion of the Sixth Doctor, this episode does have a lot of personal contributions to that plot arc and really nicely involves it within the actual plot itself, as well as includes a few references to other stories, and the Sixth Doctor, as portrayed by Colin as well, is lovely as per usual. He is a really lovely Doctor, really warm, very sassy at the same time, and does have some brilliant one-liners, but also the sheer intelligence of his character is really nicely utilised throughout this story. I feel like Jonathan Morris gets the Sixth Doctor very, very well, and which is a really lovely touch as well, because I do believe that Jonathan Morris's first ever script for Big Finish was in fact the Sixth Doctor story, Blood Tide, so that is a really lovely reference that they've done there, and it's nice to see him return to write for Colin. Of course, now that this is episode 5 of Legacy, this episode does in fact see the plot arc of Legacy come to the forefront a little bit more, which is very nice. I do like that because I was a little bit concerned by this point, because so far the plot arc of Legacy has been nothing more than a plot arc, and I think that the first 4 stories are very much stories in their own right, going to different locations, doing different things with different characters, and there is just that interlocking thread of the Legacy of Time intertwined throughout. Episode 5 sees the Legacy of Time idea be the actual point of the story itself, which means that this episode is kind of, in a way, a loose two-parter to the ending story of the box set, which naturally, once again, definitely involves the actual plot arc of Legacy of Time, because it needs to wrap up the entire box set. But it is nice to see that this story is arguably a little bit more focused to the actual villain as compared to the actual series finale, which is very unusual, and it is nice to see the Sixth Doctor going up against redacted information, so that's quite cool. But yeah, it's a nice episode, enjoyable, bit science fiction-y, bit time fracture-y as well, much like episodes 2 and episodes 4, but fun nevertheless, and certainly an episode that will be good for new listeners as well, to be delving into the world of the Sixth Doctor and Charlotte. So here we go, episode 6 of the Legacy of Time, the equivalent of a series finale, and it is of course Collision Course, as written by Guy Adams. Now this episode features Lalla Ward as Romana, President Romana in fact, alongside Louise Jameson as Leela. Now this episode does also see Tom Baker as the Fourth Doctor, and what is really lovely to see is we do have a Fourth Doctor adventure in this story, but also at the same time we have the equivalent of a Gallifrey series story, because we have President Romana and Leela on Gallifrey in the Gallifrey series format. However, they reflect on 2 adventures that they had with the Fourth Doctor, making it a kind of Fourth Doctor story as well. And what is really lovely to see is that basically we have the interactions between Tom Baker and Lalla Ward, and Tom Baker and Louise Jameson, really nicely presented throughout this story. And I think that Guy Adams is really worthy of a credit throughout this story, because he has a brilliant understanding of Tom Baker's portrayal as the Fourth Doctor, especially with different companions. When you see the equivalent of 2 different adventures taking place, there is really lovely and subtle differences between the portrayal of the Fourth Doctor travelling with Lalla Ward and the Fourth Doctor travelling with Leela. Leela's era is a little bit more laid back. You see a slightly younger version of the Fourth Doctor, who is a little bit more keen for adventure and mystery. The Fourth Doctor, as seen throughout the Lalla Ward adventures in the later half, presumably set within season 17 and season 18, is a little bit more darker and a little bit more of a Doctor that keeps his thoughts to himself, and is also a little bit more nervous as well, and is kind of worried about what the adventure is going to hold. I really do love those references throughout this story, and it certainly once again actually shows how good that Guy Adams is at actually writing character for the second time in this box set. I've literally just needed to have a break to actually listen to the entire trailer of The Legacy of Time on the Big Finish website in order to check what I can actually say without spoiling anything for this series finale, because it's very hard to talk about without talking about the actual plot of The Legacy of Time itself. And yeah, it's Turns out that from listening to that trailer, it's made this even harder. But what I do really love about this story is that it's not just a celebration of Big Finish, it kind of feels like a celebration of Doctor Who, because the actual heart of this story is Doctor Who at heart as well, if you get my drift. It's kind of like a story that is relating to the different incarnations of the Doctor, but something that brings all of them together, and that is a very key aspect of this story. So as I said, it's not just a celebration of Big Finish, but it's also a celebration of Doctor Who and the different eras of the Doctor, and also his friends that he has met along the way. I think it would be no spoiler to say that there is a multi-Doctor moment throughout this story, and the reason why I say it's no spoiler to say is because it's actually within the trailer, so I can't actually talk about that. There is different interactions between different Doctors, not saying who, but there is some really lovely ones, in particular with Colin. But I do think that there is some really lovely moments, and it's very well written by Guy, because it must be very difficult, because all Doctor Who fans want to write a multi-Doctor scene with the Doctors interacting with each other, and it is very difficult, I think, probably not to go over the top and just throw in jokes constantly within the different eras and kind of slag off their costumes and whatever else. But this meeting of the different Doctors is like no other, to say the least. It is a really lovely one, and I like it. I like it a lot. I can't say anything else, and it's really annoying. I also want to check if I could actually talk about the actual monster of the release itself, but Big Finish have also kept that under wraps. And in case you don't know, I know a lot of people do know who haven't listened to the actual release itself, but I don't really want to talk about them. But I think the actual monster themselves, it's not a giveaway to say it's not the Daleks, it's not the Cybermen, it's not the Master, which is really nice, because I can't help but think when there is a story that involves those three aforementioned characters, you know the Doctor is going to win, you know the Doctor is going to save the day, and the monster is going to be essentially defeated, because it happens all the time. That is Doctor Who, it happens every single bloody week. But with this story, the monster is a little bit more unknown and different, and an actual force that is a threat to the Doctor himself, and it's a bit unpredictable because of that. You don't really know what's going to happen, and it does feel like a lot of things are at stake, which is an experience that you wouldn't get from a story such as one with a Dalek invasion or a master plan, literally with the actual Master, because with that story you know that the Master will want to get out of the scenario alive, the Daleks want to get out of the scenario alive and actually be the supreme beings, and the Cybermen just want to upgrade everybody. Therefore you know that at least one of the parties involved wants to get out of the scenario. However, with this story, you kind of get the impression that even the monster of the actual series itself possibly wouldn't survive either. They just want to do it because they want to cause this chaos itself and essentially annihilate the universe itself. That is kind of their aim, and I think that is really cool. A colossal scope that really nicely makes this box set big and grand. And I think that it would be fair to say that this story does of course end off with a really lovely Big Finish. I'm so sorry, that was a terrible joke. So that is that, the Doctor Who Big Finish 20th Anniversary Special Release box set, which is of course The Legacy of Time, a 6-part epic featuring many different incarnations of the Doctor and many familiar faces. I would just like to credit Big Finish to start with. Overall, generally, all of the people that work on every single release from production as well as the actual cast themselves do excellent jobs and make Big Finish as brilliant as it is, but also the production team throughout this box set as well. Big Finish could have very easily got incredibly big-headed on this story and basically done a grand episode that they couldn't quite control, an episode say such as Zagreus, which is certainly a lot more hyped up from what I understand from what it actually is meant to be, and it's certainly an ambitious plot in a way, but also one that can actually be controlled by the writers. It is a really lovely celebration featuring some really lovely characters and has some really lovely references in there as well. And for that reason, considering it does contain both a plot arc as well as individual stories, it makes it perfect for celebrating Big Finish for 20 years, for experienced Big Finish listeners, but also new listeners who wish to get into Big Finish for the first ever time and delve into the many different areas that Big Finish do of course offer series within. From Bernie Summerfield to River Song to Countermeasures and the different adventures of the classic series Doctors, as well as Unit, the new series, and even the adventures of Jo Grant and the Third Doctor as portrayed by Tim Treloar. This episode, or this series without a doubt, does contain a lot of fan service, but it is fan service done right, and for that reason creates a brilliant celebratory release of not only Big Finish, but also Doctor Who as a whole. So thank you for watching this review of Doctor Who Big Finish, the 20th anniversary special, The Legacy of Time. I hope you have enjoyed it. If you have any questions about this release, please do leave them in the comments section below, and I will of course reply to them at some point in the near future, but please do bear in mind that I will not be answering any questions relating to the actual plot or spoilers within the actual script itself. And also, why not leave your opinions of The Legacy of Time as an actual box set in the comment section below as well. But please do once again keep your opinions spoiler free in order to leave the people who haven't listened to this box set as of yet with as many surprises as possible. So thank you for watching this review, and as always, stay tuned on The Host Productions every single week for brand new Doctor Who content, along with brand new Big Finish reviews every single month. And of course, on that note, happy birthday Big Finish, congratulations on 20 years, and I shall see you all next time. Bye for now.